Oh, guten Tag, and welcome back to Baby Alice's stories. We now return to A Journey to the Center of the Earth by Jules Verne. Chapter 32, Wonders of the Deep. On the 13th of August, we awoke early. We were now to begin to adopt a mode of traveling both more expeditious and less fatiguing than hitherto. A mast was made of two poles spliced together. A yard was made of a third. A blanket borrowed from our coverings made a tolerable sail. There was no want of cordage for the rigging, and everything was well and firmly made. The provisions, the baggage, the instruments, the guns, and a good quantity of fresh water from the rocks around all found their proper places on board. And at 6, the professor gave the signal to embark. Hans had fitted up a rudder to steer his vessel. He took the tiller and unmoored. The sail was set, and we were soon afloat. At the moment of leaving the harbour, my uncle, who was tenaciously fond of naming his new discoveries, wanted to give it a name, and proposed mine amongst others. But I have a better to propose, I said. Groben. Let it be called Port Groven. It will look very well upon the map. Port Groben let it be, then. And so the cherished remembrance of my Verlin days became associated with our adventurous expedition. The wind was from the northwest. We went with it at a high rate of speed. The dense atmosphere acted with great force and impelled us swiftly on. In an hour, my uncle had been able to estimate our progress. At this rate, he said, we shall make 30 leagues in 24 hours, and we shall soon come in sight of the opposite shore. I made no answer, but went and sat forward. The northern shore was already beginning to dip under the horizon. The eastern and western strands spread wide, as if to bid us farewell. Before our eyes lay far and wide a vast sea. Shadows of great clouds swept heavily over its silver-grey surface. The glistening bluish rays of electric light, here and there reflected by the dancing drops of spray, shot out little sheaves of light from the track we left in our rear. Soon we entirely lost sight of land. No object was left for the eye to judge by, and but for the frothy track of the raft, I might have thought we were standing still. About 12 immense shoals of seaweeds came in sight. I was aware of the great powers of vegetation that characterize these plants, which grow at a depth of 12,000 feet, reproduce themselves under a pressure of 400 atmospheres, and sometimes form barriers strong enough to impede the course of a ship. But never, I think, were such seaweeds as those which we saw floating in immense waving lines upon the sea of Liedenbrock. Our raft skirted the whole length of the Fuji, 3,000 or 4,000 feet long, undulating like vast serpents beyond the reach of sight. I found some amusement in tracing these endless waves, always thinking I should come to the end of them and for hours my patience was vying with my surprise. What natural force could have produced such plants, and what must have been the appearance of the earth in the first ages of its formation, when, under the action of heat and moisture, the vegetable kingdom alone was developing on its surface? Evening came, and as on the previous day I perceived no change in the luminous conditions of the air. It was a constant condition, the permanency of which might be relied upon. After supper I laid myself down at the foot of the mast and fell asleep in the midst of fantastic reveries. Hans, keeping fast by the helm, let the raft run on, which, after all, needed no steering, the wind blowing directly aft. Since our departure from Port Gruben, Professor Liedenbrock had entrusted the log to my care. I was to register every observation, make entries of interesting phenomena, the direction of the wind, the rate of sailing, the way we made, in a word, every particular of our singular voyage. I shall therefore reproduce here these daily notes, written, so to speak, as the course of events directed, in order to furnish an exact narrative of our passage. Friday, August 14th. Wind steady, northwest, the raft makes rapid way in a direct line. Coast 30 leagues to leeward, nothing in sight before us, intensity of light the same, weather fine, that is to say, that the clouds are flying high, are light and bathed in a white atmosphere resembling silver in a state of fusion. Thermometer 89 degrees Fahrenheit. At noon, Hans prepared a hook at the end of a line. He baited it with a small piece of meat and flung it into the sea. For 2 hours nothing was caught. Are these waters, then, bare of inhabitants? No, there's a pull at the line. Hans draws it in and brings out a struggling fish. "A sturgeon!" I cried. "A small sturgeon!" The professor eyes the creature attentively, and his opinion differs from mine. The head of this fish was flat, but rounded in front, and the anterior part of its body was plated with bony, angular scales. It had no teeth. Its pectoral fins were large, and of tail there was none. The animal belonged to the same order as the sturgeon, but differed from that fish in many essential particulars. After a short examination, my uncle pronounced his opinion. "This fish belongs to an extinct family, of which only fossil traces are found in the Devonian formations." "What?" I cried. "Have we taken alive an inhabitant of the seas of primitive ages?" "Yes, and you will observe that these fossil fishes have no identity with any living species. To have in one's possession a living specimen is a happy event for a naturalist." "But to what family does it belong?" "It is of the order of ganoids, of the family of the Cephalaspidae, and a species of Pterichthys."
Pterichthys.
Pterichthys. But this one displays a peculiarity confined to all fishes that inhabit subterranean waters. It is blind, and not only blind, but actually has no eyes at all. I looked. Nothing could be more certain. But supposing it might be a solitary case, we baited afresh and threw out our line. Surely this ocean is well peopled with fish. For in another couple of hours we took a large quantity of pterichthyids. XXXIIs, as well as of others belonging to the extinct family of the dipterites, but of which my uncle could not tell the species. None had organs of sight. This unhoped for catch recruited our stock of provisions. Thus it is evident that this sea contains none but species known to us in their fossil state, in which fishes as well as reptiles are the less perfectly and completely organized the farther back the date of creation. Perhaps we may yet meet with some of those saurians which science has reconstructed out of a bit of bone or cartilage.
Saurians.
Saurian, of or like a lizard. I took up the telescope and scanned the whole horizon and found it everywhere a desert sea. We are far away removed from the shores. I gaze upward in the air. Why should not some of the strange birds restored by the immortal Cuvier again flap their sail-broad vans in this dense and heavy atmosphere? There are sufficient fish for their support. I survey the whole space that stretches overhead. It is as desert as the shore was. Still, my imagination carried me away amongst the wonderful speculations of paleontology. So, though awake, I fell into a dream. I thought I could see floating on the surface of the waters enormous chelonia, preadamite tortoises resembling floating islands. Over the dimly lighted strand there trod the huge mammals of the first ages of the world, the leptotherium, slender beast, found in the caverns of Brazil, the mericotherium, ruminating beast, found in the drift of ice-clad Siberia. Farther on, the Pachydermatus lophiodon, crested-toothed. A gigantic tapir hides behind the rocks to dispute its prey with the Anoplotherium, unarmed beast, a strange creature which seemed a compound of horse, rhinoceros, camel, and hippopotamus. The colossal mastodon, nipple-tooth, twists and untwists his trunk and brays and pounds with his husk. With his huge tusks, the fragments of rock that cover the shore, whilst the megatherium, huge beast, but rest upon his enormous hinder paws, grubs in the soil, awakening the sonorous echoes of the granite rocks with his tremendous roarings. Higher up, the Protopitheca, the first monkey that appeared on the globe, is climbing up the steep ascents. Yet higher, the pterodactyl, wing-fingered, darts in irregular zigzags to and fro in the heavy air. In the uppermost regions of the air, immense birds, more powerful than the cassowary and larger than the ostrich, spread their vast breadths of wings and strike with their heads the granite vault that bounds the sky. All this fossil world rises to life again in my vivid imagination. I return to the scriptural periods of ages of the world, conventionally called days, long before the appearance of man, when the unfinished world was yet unfitted for his support. Then my dream backed even further still, into the ages before the creation of living beings. The mammals disappear, then the birds vanish, then the reptiles of the secondary period, and finally the fish, the crustaceans, mollusks, and articulated beings. Then the zoophytes of the transition period also return to nothing. I am the only living thing in the world. All life is concentrated in my beating heart alone. There are no more seasons. Climates are no more. The heat of the globe continually increases and neutralizes that of the sun. Vegetation becomes accelerated. I glide like a shade amongst arborescent ferns, treading with unsteady feet the colored marls and the parti-colored clays. I lean for support against the trunks of immense conifers. I lie in the shade of sphenophilia, wedge-leaved, asterophilia, star-leaved, and lycopods, 100 feet high. Ages seem no more than days. I am passed against my will in retrograde order through the long series of terrestrial changes. Flats disappear, granite rocks soften, intense heat converts soil bodies into thick fluids. The waters again cover the face of the earth. They boil, they rise in whirling eddies of steam. White and ghastly mists wrap round the shifting forms of the earth, which, by imperceptible degrees, dissolves into a gaseous mass, glowing fiery red and white, as large and as shiny as the sun. And I myself am floating with wild caprice in the midst of this nebulous mass of 1,400,000 times the volume of the earth, into which it will one day be condensed and carried forward amongst the planetary bodies. My body is no longer firm and terrestrial. It is resolved into its constituent atoms, substellized and volatilized, sublime into imponderable vapor. I mingle and I am lost in the endless foods of those vast globular volumes of vaporous mists which roll upon their flaming orbits through infinite space. But is it not a dream? Whither it is carrying me? My feverish hand has vainly attempted to describe upon paper its strange and wonderful details. I have forgotten everything that surrounds me. The professor, the guide, the raft are all gone out of my ken. An illusion has laid hold upon me. "What is the matter?" my uncle breaks in. My staring eyes are fixed vacantly upon him. "Take care, Axel, or you will fall overboard." At that moment I felt the sinewy hand of Hans seizing me vigorously, but for him, carried away by my dream, I should have thrown myself into the sea. "Is he mad?" cried the professor. "What is it all about?" at last I cried, returning to myself. "Do you feel ill?" my uncle asked. No, but I have had a strange hallucination. It is over now. Is all going on right?" "Yes. It is a fair wind and a fine sea. We are sailing rapidly along, and if I am not out in my reckoning, we shall soon land." At those words I rose and gazed round upon the horizon, still everywhere bounded by clouds alone. Chapter 33. A Battle of Monsters. Saturday, August 15th. The sea, unbroken all round. No land in sight. The horizon seems extremely distant. My head is still stupefied with the vivid reality of my dream. My uncle has had no dreams, but he is out of temper. He examines the horizon all round with his glass, and folds his arms with the air of an injured man. I remark that Professor Liedenbrock has a tendency to relapse into an impatient mood, and I make a note of it in my log. All my danger and sufferings were needed to strike a spark of human feeling out of him, But now that I am well, His nature has resumed its sway. And yet, what cause was there for anger? Is not the voyage prospering as favorably as possible under the circumstances? Is not the raft spinning along with marvelous speed? You seem anxious, my uncle, I said, seeing him continually with his glass to his eye. Anxious? No, not at all. Impatient then? One might be, with less reason than now. Yet we are going very fast. What does that signify? I am not complaining that the rate is slow, but that the sea is so wide. I then remembered that the professor, before starting, had estimated the length of this underground sea at 30 leagues. Now we had made 3 times the distance, yet still the southern coast was not in sight. We are not descending as we ought to be, the professor declares. We are losing time. And the fact is, I have not come all this way to take a little sail upon a pond on a raft. He calls this sea a pond. Ha ha! And our long voyage, taking a little sail. But, I remarked, since we have followed the road that Saknussemm has shown us, that is just the question. Have we followed that road? Did Saknussemm meet this sheet of water? Did he cross it? Has not the stream that we followed led us altogether astray? At any rate, we cannot feel sorry to have come so far. This prospect is magnificent, but I don't care for prospects. I came with an object, and I mean to attain it. Therefore, don't talk to me about views and prospects. I take this as my answer, and I leave the professor to bite his lips with impatience. At 6 in the evening, Hans asks for his wages, and his three rix dollars are counted out to him. Sunday, August 16th. Nothing new. Weather unchanged. The wind freshens. On awaking, my first thought was to observe the intensity of the light. I was possessed with an apprehension lest the electric light should grow dim or fail altogether. But there seemed no reason to fear. The shadow of the raft was clearly outlined upon the surface of the waves. Truly, this sea is of infinite width. It must be as wide as the Mediterranean or the Atlantic, and why not? My uncle took sounding several times. He tied the heaviest of our pickaxes to a long rope which he let down 200 fathoms. No bottom yet, and we had some difficulty in hauling up our plummet. But when the pick was shipped again, Hans pointed out on its surface deep prints as if it had been violently compressed between 2 hard bodies. I looked at the hunter. "Thunder," said he. I could not understand him, and turned to my uncle, who was entirely absorbed in his calculations. "I had rather not disturb him while he is quiet," I returned to the Icelander. He, by a snapping motion of his jaws, conveys his ideas to me. "Teeth!" I cried, considering the iron bar with more attention. "Yes, indeed, those are the marks of teeth, imprinted upon the metal. The jaws which they arm must be possessed of amazing strength. Is there some monster beneath us belonging to the extinct races, more voracious than the shark, more fearful in vastness than the whale?" I could not take my eyes off this indented iron bar. Surely will my last night's dream be realized? These thoughts agitated me all day, and my imagination scarcely calmed down after several hours' sleep. Monday, August 17th. I am trying to recall the peculiar instincts of the monsters of the pre-Adamite world, who, coming next in succession after the mollusks, the crustaceans and leafishes, preceded the animals of mammalian race upon the earth. The world then belonged to reptiles. Those monsters held the mastery in the seas of the secondary period. They possessed a perfect organization, gigantic proportions, prodigious strength. The saurians of our day, the alligators and the crocodiles, are but feeble reproductions of their forefathers of primitive ages. I shuddered as I recalled these monsters to my remembrance. No human eye has ever beheld them living. They burdened this earth 1,000 ages before man appeared, but their fossil remains, found in the argillaceous limestone called by the English the lias, have enabled their colossal structure to be perfectly built up again and anatomically ascertained. I saw at the Hamburg Museum the skeleton of one of these creatures, 30 feet in length. Am I then fated, I, a denizen of earth, to be placed face to face with these representatives of long extinct families? No, nein, surely it cannot be. Yet the deep marks of conical teeth upon the iron pick are certainly those of the crocodile. My eyes are fearfully bent upon the sea. I dread to see one of these monsters darting forth from its submarine caverns. I suppose Professor Liedenbrock was of my opinion too, and even shared my fears, for after having examined the pig, his eyes traversed the ocean from side to side. What a very bad notion that was of his, I thought to myself, to take soundings just here. He has disturbed some monstrous beast in its remote den, and if we are not attacked on our voyage... I looked at our guns and see that they are all right. My uncle notices it and looks on approvingly. Already widely disturbed regions on the surface of the water indicate some commotion below. The danger is approaching. We must be on the lookout. Tuesday, August 18. Evening came, or rather, the time came when sleep weighs down the very eyelids. For there is no night here, and the ceaseless light wearies the eyes with its persistency, just as if we were sailing under an Arctic sun. Hans was at the helm during his watch. I slept. 2 hours afterwards, a terrible shock awoke me. The raft was heaved up on a watery mountain and pitched down again at a distance of 20 fathoms. "What is the matter?" shouted my uncle. "Have we struck land?" Hans pointed with his finger at a dark mass 600 yards away, rising and falling alternately with heavy plunges. I looked and cried, "It is an enormous porpoise!" "Yes," replied my uncle, "and there is a sea lizard of vast size. And further on, a monstrous crocodile. Look at its vast jaws and its rows of teeth. It is diving down." "There's a whale, cried the professor. "I can see its great fins. See how he is throwing out air and water through his blowers." And in fact, 2 liquid columns were rising to a considerable height above the sea. We stood amazed, thunderstruck, at the presence of such a herd of marine monsters. They were of supernatural dimensions. The smallest of them would have crushed our raft, would have crunched our raft, crew and oar, at one snap of its huge jaws. Hans wants to tack to get away from this dangerous neighborhood, but he sees on the other hand enemies not less terrible, a tortoise 40 feet long and a serpent of 30 lifting its fearful head and gleaming eyes above the flood. Flight was out of the question now. The reptiles rose. They wheeled around our little raft with a rapidity greater than that of express trains. They described around us gradually narrowing circles. I took up my rifle. But what could a ball do against the scaly armor with which these enormous beasts were clad? We stood dumb with fear. They approached us close. On one side the crocodile, on the other the serpent. The remainder of the sea monsters have disappeared. I prepared to fire. Hans stops me by a gesture. The two monsters pass within 150 yards of the raft and hurl themselves the one upon the other with a fury which prevents them from seeing us. At 300 yards from us the battle was fought. We could distinctly observe the two monsters engage in deadly conflict. What it now seems to me as if the other animals were taking part in the fray. The porpoise, the whale, the lizard, the tortoise. Every moment I seem to see one or other of them. I point them to the Icelander. He shakes his head negatively. "Twa," says he. "What two? Does he mean that there are only two animals?" "He is right," said my uncle, whose glass has never left his eye. "Surely you must be mistaken," I cried. "No, the first of those monsters has a porpoise snout, a lizard's head, and a crocodile's teeth, and hence our mistake. It is the XXXII, the fish lizard, the most terrible of the ancient monsters of the deep." "And the other?" "The other is a Plesiosaurus, almost lizard, a serpent, armored with the carapace and the paddles of a turtle. He is the dreadful enemy of the other." Hans had spoken truly. Two monsters only were creating all this commotion, and before my eyes are two reptiles of the world. I can distinguish the eye of the Ichthyosaurus, glowing like a red-hot coal, and as large as a man's head. Nature has endowed it with an optical apparatus of extreme power, and capable of resisting the pressure of the great volume of water in the depths it inhabits. It has been appropriately called the saurian whale, for it has both the swiftness and the rapid movements of this monster of our own day. This one is not less than 100 feet long, and I can judge of its size when it sweeps over the waters, the vertical coils of its tail. Its jaw is enormous, and according to naturalists, it is armed with no less than 182 teeth. The Plesiosaurus, a serpent with a cylindrical body and a short tail, has 4 flappers or paddles to act like oars. Its body is entirely covered with a thick armor of scales, and its neck, as flexible as a swan's, rises 30 feet above the waves. Those huge creatures attacked each other with the greatest animosity. They heaved around them liquid mountains, which rolled even to our raft and rocked it perilously. 20 times we were near capsizing. Hissings of prodigious force are heard. Two beasts are fast locked together. I cannot distinguish the other from the other. I cannot distinguish the one from the other. The probable rage of the conqueror inspires us with intense fear. 1 hour, 2 hours pass away. The struggle continues with unabated ferocity. The combatants alternately approach and recede from our raft. We remain motionless, ready to fire. Suddenly, the ichthyosaurus and the plesiosaurus disappear below, leaving a whirlpool eddying in the water. Several minutes pass by while the fight goes on underwater. All at once, an enormous head is darted up. The head of the plesiosaurus. The monster is wounded to death. I no longer see his scaly armor. Only his long neck shoots up, drops again, coils and uncoils, droops, lashes the water like a gigantic whip, and writhes like a worm that you tread on. The water is splashed for a long way round. The spray almost blinds us, but soon the reptile's agony draws to an end. Its movements become fainter. Its contortions cease to be so violent, and the long serpentine form lies, a lifeless log, on the laboring deep. As for the ichthyosaurus, has he returned to his submarine cavern, or will he reappear on the surface of the sea? Chapter 34. The Great Geyser. Wednesday, August 19. Fortunately, the wind blows violently and has enabled us to flee from the scene of the late terrible struggle. Hans keeps at his post at the helm. My uncle, whom the absorbing incidents of the combat had drawn away from his contemplations, began again to look impatiently around him. The voyage resumes its uniform tenor, which I don't care to break with a repetition of such events as yesterday's. Thursday, August 20. Wind north-northeast, unsteady and fitful. Temperature high. Rate 3.5 leagues an hour. About noon, a distant noise is heard. I note the fact without being able to explain it. It is a continuous roar. In the distance, says the professor, there is a rock or islet against which the sea is breaking. Hans climbs up the mast, but sees no breakers. The ocean is smooth and unbroken to its furthest limit. 3 hours pass away. The roaring seemed to proceed from a very distant waterfall. I remark upon this to my uncle, who replies doubtfully. Yes, I am convinced that I am right. Are we, then, speeding forward to some cataract which will cast us down an abyss? This method of getting on may please the professor, because it is vertical, but for my part, I prefer the more ordinary modes of horizontal progression. At any rate, some leagues to the windward, there must be some noisy phenomenon, for now the roarings are heard with increasing loudness. Do they proceed from the sky or the ocean? I look up to the atmospheric vapors and try to fathom their depths. The sky is calm and motionless. The clouds have reached the utmost limit of the lofty vault, and there lies still, bathed in the bright glare of the electric light. It is not there that we must seek for the cause of this phenomenon. Then I examine the horizon, which is unbroken and clear of all mist. There is no change in its aspect. But if this noise arises from a fall, a cataract, if all this ocean flows away headlong into a lower basin, yet if that deafening roar is produced by a mass of falling water, the current must needs accelerate, and its increasing speed will give me the measure of the peril that threatens us. I consult the current. There is none. I throw an empty bottle into the sea. It lies still. About 4 Hans rises, lays hold of the mast, climbs to its top. Since his eye sweeps a large area of sea, and it is fixed upon a point, his countenance exhibits no surprise, but his eye is immovably steady. "He sees something," says my uncle. "I believe he does." Hans comes down, then stretches his arm to the south, saying, "There near." "Down there?" repeated my uncle. Then, seizing his glass, he gazes attentively for a minute, which seems to me an age. "Yes, yes," he cried. "I see a vast inverted cone rising from the surface." "Is it another sea beast?" "Perhaps it is." "Then let us steer further westward, for we know something of the danger of coming across monsters of that sort." "Let us go straight on," replied my uncle. I appealed to Hans. He maintained his course inflexibly. Yet, if at our present distance from the animal, a distance of 12 leagues at the least, the column of water driven through its blowers may be distinctly seen, it must needs be of vast size. The commonest prudence would counsel immediate flight, but we did not come so far to be prudent. Imprudently, therefore, we pursue our way. The nearer we approach, the higher mounts the jet of water. What monster can possibly fill itself with such a quantity of water and spurt it up so continuously? At 8 in the evening, we are not 2 leagues distant from it. Its body, dusky, enormous, hillocky, lies spread upon the sea like an islet. Is it illusion or fear? Its length seems to me a couple of 1,000 yards. What can be this cetacean which neither Cuvier nor Blumenbach knew anything about? It lies motionless, as if asleep. The sea seems unable to move it in the least. It is the waves that undulate upon its sides. The column of water, thrown up to the height of 500 feet, falls in rain with a deafening uproar. And here we are, scudding like lunatics before the wind, to get near to a monster that 100 veils a day would not satisfy. Terror seizes upon me. I refuse to go further. I will cut the halyards if necessary. I am in open mutiny against the professor, who vouchsafes no answer. Suddenly, Hans rises, and pointing with his finger at the menacing object, he says, "Hurn!" "An island!" cries my uncle. That's not an island!" I cried skeptically. "It's nothing else!" shouted the professor with a loud laugh. "But that column of water!" "Geyser!" "No doubt it is a geyser like those in Iceland." At first I protest against being so widely mistaken as to have taken an island for a marine monster, but the evidence is against me, and I have to confess my error. It is nothing worse than a natural phenomenon. As we approach nearer, the dimensions of the liquid column become magnificent. As we approach nearer, the dimensions of the liquid column become magnificent. The islet resembles, with a most deceiving likeness, an enormous cetacean whose head dominates the waves at a height of 20 yards. The geyser, a word meaning fury, rises majestically from its extremity. Deep and heavy explosions are heard from time to time. Then the enormous jet, possessed with more furious violence, shakes its plumy crest and springs with a bound till it reaches the lower stratum of the clouds. It stands alone. No steam vents, no hot springs surround it, and all the volcanic power of the region is concentrated here. Sparks of electric fire mingle with the dazzling sheaf of lighted fluid, every drop of which refracts the prismatic colors. "Let us land," said the professor. "But we must carefully avoid this waterspout, which would sink our raft in a moment." Hans, steering with his usual skill, brought us to the other extremity of the islet. I leaped up on the rock. My uncle lightly followed, while our hunter remained at his post, like a man too wise ever to be astonished. We walked upon granite mingled with siliceous tufa. The soil shivers and shakes under our feet like the sides of an overheated boiler filled with steam struggling to get loose. We come in sight of a small central basin, out of which the geyser springs. I plunge a register thermometer into the boiling water. It marks an intense heat of 325 degrees Celsius, which is far above the boiling point. Therefore, this water issues from an ardent furnace, which is not at all in harmony with Professor Liedenbrock's theories. I cannot help making the remark. "Well," he replied, "how does that make against my doctrine?" "Oh, nothing at all," I said, seeing that I was going in opposition to immovable obstinacy. Still, I am constrained to confess that hitherto we have been wonderfully favored, and that for some reason unknown to myself, we have accomplished our journey under singularly favorable conditions of temperature. But it seems manifest to me that some day we shall reach a region where the central heat attains its highest limits and goes beyond the points that can be registered by our thermometers. "This is what we shall see," so says the professor, who, having named this volcanic islet after his nephew, gives the signal to embark again. For some minutes I am still contemplating the geyser. I notice that it throws up its column of water with variable force, sometimes sending it to a greater height, then again to a lower, which I attribute to the variable pressure of the stream, of the steam accumulated in its reservoir. At last we leave the island, rounding away past the low rocks on its southern shore. Hans has taken advantage of the halt to refit his rudder. But before going any further, I make a few observations, to calculate the distance that we have gone over and note them in my journal. We have crossed 270 leagues of sea since leaving Port Groben, and we are 620 leagues from Iceland, under England. Side note: this distance carries the travelers as far as under the Pyrenees, if the league measures 3 miles. End side note.